All right, so welcome to today's forum. We have something really exciting and really topical. We'll be talking about the initiative petition process. I'm just as excited to learn more about this as you are. And with us talking about this will be our ever great, ever smart and wise Sarah Owsley, our policy director. But joining us is the equally smart and equally wise Nomachot, and she is in Kansas City. And a bit more about her. Nomachot is the Kansas City organizer for Missouri Healthcare for All, an organization that advocates for quality, affordable healthcare for all Missourians. She mobilizes and empowers people in the Kansas City metro area to act and affect healthcare policy in Missouri. Nomachot is passionate about building collective power in ways that cultivate strong, authentic relationships. She has been involved in community organizing work for years, and her recent work has focused on defending Medicaid expansion and protecting the initiative petition process from attacks in the Missouri legislature. AKA, she's an expert. So I'm going to turn it over to Nomachot and Sarah to get started. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is pull up the presentation and then they'll get started.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much, Nashel. I appreciate that. Really looking forward to chatting with you all today and talking about this really important issue that I think many of us have interacted with the initiative petition process before, but we don't have a real deep knowledge or understanding of how it works or functions in our state, or how lucky we are to have that process available to us, because many states around us don't have an initiative petition process at all. So this is one of those chances where we can really look back and thank the advocates in our past across the state and recognize the role that we can play in the future. I also want to, just before we get too far into it, just really acknowledge that Nomachot did a lot of pivoting for us in the last few days as the session had to change a little bit. Originally, Ron Berry was going to join us, and Ron was not able to at the last moment. For very good reasons, but we are kind of piecemealing it together, the two of us together, and there's no one else I'd rather do that with than Nomachot. So Nashel, the next slide is just the agenda. We have done the speed networking, so we're good on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the initiative petition process works now. What are some of the changes? Nomachot and I are going to talk through some of the proposed changes. And then Nomachot's going to walk you through what we can do to help stop those changes from advancing too far forward and removing this really important and useful tool. So the next slide is just some history of the initiative petition process. The basics of it is that this is a process by which voters in our state can come together, recognize that we want a specific policy or law change, or most recently, often it's a constitutional amendment, and work together to make that happen. It was founded in 1910, and it's been used for a variety of policies across its history, both what we would call traditionally liberal and traditionally conservative policies both ways, including preventing new taxes or tax increases, support for farmers. It is how we raised the minimum wage in the state of Missouri to $12. We've done lots of good things with the initiative petition process, and lots of things that maybe you think are not good. And that's fine too, but what they were is ideas that were brought by the citizenry, by the voters, initiated by the voters, placed on the ballot, and then approved by the voters. The next slide will talk a little bit about why we're chatting today. Why is the initiative petition process under attack? If it's used in a really bipartisan way, if it's been used for historically successful changes that people like, why is it something that seems to be so focused on right now? I think the short answer there really easily is that lawmakers have a short memory. Because we have term limits, because we have lots of new folks in Jeff City really regularly, lawmakers don't remember that this has been a really bipartisan policy for a really long time. And a lot of conservative lawmakers in our past have really liked the initiative petition process, and instead are seeing that more recent wins have seemed to be more progressive wins. And so that feels frustrating, I think, for lawmakers who really feel like they were elected to their roles, and then the voters of our state are making choices that are different than they would. There's a lot of messaging that tends to come from these lawmakers, and it really seems to center on these two arguments. Either the Constitution is changed too frequently, which whether or not you believe that our state should be governed the same way it was in 1910 or not, we've got some good answers to that idea that the Constitution has changed too frequently, and therefore we should make the initiative petition process harder. There also is a real conversation that citizens and voters in our state don't understand, whatever it is, right? Maybe they don't understand what their vote did. They don't understand what the current law is or the current process or how the changes might impact the state. They don't understand that there's a fiscal note that's assigned to these policies often that now the state has to pay for. I think, right, I have thousands of conversations every year with Missouri residents. I think we really are an engaged population who definitely understands what our votes mean and what the things we want our state to do and how we want our state resources to be spent. It's also a good reminder that those state resources come from us, right? And we understand how we want those resources to be spent. So I think that this idea that voters just don't understand what their vote means or how it's going to really impact the policy, I think is just flat out false. And I think we can really quickly dismiss that idea. So the next slide here is just kind of a really pretty walkthrough about what the initiative petition looks like right now in the state. So the first step is someone has an idea, someone or a group of someone's impacted folks, organizers, community members say like, here is a problem and here's a proposed solution. And we should put this on the ballot in the state. We should have this policy. We should have Medicaid expansion. We should have healthcare for, the folks who live here who are close to the poverty line. We should have higher wages for the folks who work in our state. We, have this idea and we think we should do it. They work with lawyers and they draft up legal language, right? This is not like I can't just create a petition that says all school children should be served chocolate ice cream on Fridays, and that's the whole thing. And then I collect a bunch of signatures and put it on the ballot. I have to, submit that to the Secretary of State. They have to review that process, make sure that it's legal, make sure it's not going to violate anything, make sure that the language makes sense and it's going to really do what it says it's going to do. Down to the ballot language. Everything has to be approved by the Secretary of State. They look over that. They make sure that it's, they don't say it's a good idea or a bad idea, but they do say this is an implementable idea and something we could do. After that is approved, a signature gathering process begins. Over 260,000 signatures are needed to put the idea on a ballot. Those signatures are not votes. They are not, yes, I think this is a good idea and we should pass it. It's just, yes, I think we should put this on the ballot. We should ask the folks who live here whether or not they want this. That 260,000 threshold is created because it's a percentage of each congressional district across our state. So it can't just be St. Louis has this idea, and so St. Louis puts this idea on the ballot, and now everyone has to do this thing that only people in St. Louis want. It's already that everybody in our state has the opportunity to weigh in on whether or not that question should be asked, whether or not it should be put on the ballot. And it's not like anybody who's engaged in the signature gathering process understands we don't gather 261 signatures, right? It's already, you collect a percentage above that amount to make sure that all of those voters are registered voters. They all live at the address they said they lived at. They're registered at the address they said they were registered at. If you've moved since you updated your voter registration, if you are not a registered voter and you just think you are, et cetera, there's lots of reasons. If your signature is illegible and it looks like somebody might have forged it, if there's like, if you like cross out too thoroughly on a line instead of just cross through, they might bump all the signatures on that whole page. There's pretty stringent rules to make sure that these are actually voters in our state, people who really live here, who are engaged in the process. And again, it's still just to ask the question. None of these are actual votes yet. So we collect way more than the 260,000. We end up collecting well over 300,000 signatures just to meet that approval threshold. The very first thing I did in my career was an initiative petition locally in Kansas City, and we collected like 70% more signatures than we needed just to make sure we could cover in case folks were not registered the way they thought they were. Then after that is all approved by the Secretary of State, they review the boards of elections, review all those signatures, and then they put it on the ballot. And there's a couple of slides here about proposed changes and how those might alter the current IP process, but we're going to cover that more in depth later. So we can go ahead and skip that, just like Nichelle was working on. There's a slide above that that says initiative petition process that we want. There you go. Thank you so much. So we really believe that the current process is appropriately difficult. It's not really easy to put something on the ballot. It's already a pretty, stringent, pretty high bar already. And everything that has happened up until now is just to put the issue on the ballot. All of these folks just have to say, yes, we want to ask that question. Yes, we should propose this to the voters. None of them are votes. And so you can sign a petition, you can gather petitions and still choose to vote no on that issue later. It's really just an issue, the question is whether or not we should ask the question, whether we should ask folks in our communities whether or not this is an idea that they want implemented in our state. After that, it goes on the ballot, and 50% plus one have to approve that issue to pass it. So remember earlier I said that there's kind of this rhetoric or conversation in the state that maybe we pass too many constitutional amendments. We change our constitution too much. I think it's important for us to remember, if we hear that, the first thing that it's important for us to remember is constitutional amendments are the only thing that the legislature has to do. If we pass a policy and it's not a constitutional amendment and the legislators don't like it, right, which they often don't, otherwise they would have implemented it themselves. The only way to make sure that they have to implement it, they have to move it forward, is through a constitutional amendment. And so it might be true that too many of these initiative petitions are constitutional amendments because it's the only way to ensure that the programmatic change or whatever it is actually going to be implemented. So we really need to make sure that that's part of what we think about when we get told, well, we change our constitution too often. It's also true that state constitutions are designed to be more flexible, to be amended more frequently than the federal constitution. That's how they were written. That's how that's the whole design. That's the point of them, because they have more impact in our daily lives. They should be more centralized and localized and available and eligible to be altered. And like I said before, I think many of us would agree that we don't really want our state to operate the same way now in 2022 as it did in 1910. There's lots of things that have changed that I would like to continue to have changed. And my hope is that in another 100 years, my great-great-grandchildren also have an entirely different interaction with their state than we do. We think that that's progress and growth, and I think that's probably a good thing. But it's important for us to really contextualize that argument. If that's the issue, that the Constitution has changed too much, we really need to contextualize that and look at what that means. And so here's some, a nice little graphic that shows you since the initiative petition process began in 1910. Oh, one back up there, Nichelle, sorry. Since it began in 1910, we have altered our Constitution this 311 times, and most of those come from the Missouri legislature. Most of them are not from the initiative petition process. And so if there's an issue with too many constitutional amendments, we really need to look at where they come from. And they really do come from the General Assembly most often. So then the next thing we really need to consider is whether or not, I'm ready now for the next slide there, Nichelle, thank you, is whether or not voters in our state do understand the things that they're asking for. And if they don't, if we do need to make a change to that threshold of voters to approve it, we in the state of Missouri often like to look to our neighbors and see what they're doing, see what works in other states who are similar to ours, and what, what's the kind of standard across the country. So almost everyone across the country, almost every state uses that 50% plus one margin to be able to pass constitutional amendments. Only a handful of states have them set any higher, and those states often struggle to pass any constitutional changes. And so it would really put us out of line with the majority of the country, which is not something Missouri usually likes to do. We usually really like to, show us what works and what doesn't. We like to use that show me mindset to really kind of follow our neighbors. The next slide, just a couple of more notes about the current initiative petition process. It is not a silver bullet. More than 60% of the issues that make it to the ballot don't actually pass. So it's not like every single thing that is put on the ballot passes because it was done through initiative petition. It's not a silver bullet. Lots of things don't advance and move into actual policy. It's also worth us remembering, like, it's an expensive process as it is now. It costs a lot of money to get these issues on the ballot, to get them all the way through the campaign portion. And if we make that process more difficult, that makes it even more expensive, which really shuts out our ability as neighbors and community members to really impact the laws that govern us. And so if the issue is not really the initiative petition process, why are we looking at that? So I think that those are all some really important things for us to kind of keep in mind. Nomachot's going to talk us through now, like, what are some of the proposed changes that are moving through the legislature. There are, I think, 18, is that right? Proposed bills in the legislature right now that would change the initiative petition process. You can find all of them on our website. I'll link them in the chat box here while Nomachot's chatting.
Yeah, actually there's over 20 bills that actually is trying to attack the initiative petition process. A lot of them are pretty similar to each other in terms of, like, they focus on the number of signatures and the threshold. But yeah, so some of the proposed changes would be to increase the filing fee to $500. The other one would give the Attorney General the ability to write misleading ballot language. And in another, it says that the courts would not be able to challenge it. And that one's really important because a lot of times when we've had to fight, and the courts usually are in favor in terms of the fact that the language has been misleading, and so they want to be able to do that to make it harder for us to pass things that, as a collective we would agree on. They want to increase the number of signatures to 435,000 as a max, but again, like, a lot of the different ones have different thresholds. But if anyone here has gathered signatures, like Sarah said, it's already difficult, but also on average, as an organizer, I would tell you it takes an hour to gather 10 signatures. That's basically what we go by. So imagine the kind of work that we're already putting into that, and then for them to basically double the amount we have to do is it makes it much more difficult. And like Sarah was saying as well, like, a lot of times our goal is to double the amount of signatures to make sure that that protects us from them having to, like, throw out some. And so before that, it would be, where our goal would be 300,000 or 400,000 to get to the 260, but now it's almost approaching 1 million signatures to try to get something passed. And then the last thing is that it increases the threshold to 2/3, like Sarah said. I think what is important for us to point out is that this doesn't make it difficult. It makes it impossible for us to pass things. This is essentially a power grab, and there's no way an everyday person would be able to, everyday people will be able to do something like this. And their argument that they've made is that they're trying to prevent out-of-state interest groups from getting involved, but the fact that it's expensive means that, and adding all of these requirements to me would actually make it seem like we, as everyday people, wouldn't be able to do it, and the out-of-state interest groups could more likely get involved. So it doesn't make sense what they're saying. But yeah, this is a power grab, and it's something that as voters, we need to make sure to let legislators know that we're not okay with any of these changes. Next slide. Okay, so I and Ashton from Sierra Club and Richard from Jobs Justice have been working to build capacity around the organizing for initiative petition process. Our goal is to essentially not get anything on the ballot, but we also want to prepare just in case that happens. So right now we've been having basically Tuesday morning meetings that that people can be updated on what's going on in the legislature and what tools that we provide and things around organizing. But the main thing that we're trying to focus on is making sure to contact our senators and tell them that none of us are okay with that. And we have a few targets that we are trying to address, some that are in St. Louis, Kansas City. And so if you are interested in doing an interdistrict meeting, we can coordinate that with other folks that are in the coalition. And yeah, I'll make sure to put my email in the chat and we can talk about that. So in the KC area, some of the senators that we're trying to address are Searpoy and Luchtenmeyer, and then in the St. Louis area would be Mosley or May. So if any of those people are your senators, then we'll be happy to help. We'll be happy for you to join one of our meetings. The other thing that we're trying to do is have a lobby day on May 3rd. And that's to basically demonstrate our power. Our goal is to get at least 100 people there. And so we would have a rally and then, split up and talk to the senators. And again, it's just to show them that, we mean business when we say that we are not okay with any of these changes. And the other thing too is like our goal is to have 100 organizations sign on. We have a letter of opposition that I'll make sure to share in the chat after this. And then we also have April phone banks that we're going to be doing. So starting April 5th, we're going to do a phone bank every Tuesday and Wednesday night to do patch-through calls for specific senator targets. So those people could directly say to their senators that we are not interested in any of these changes. And we'll be doing those throughout the month. So there'll be 8 in total. And then, like I was saying before, you could join our Tuesday morning calls, where we will update you on what bills are moving and what people can do about it. We've been helping people with messaging around LTEs and op-eds, as well as what to say if they want to submit testimony for a lot of these bills. But yeah. That's it for the opportunities to get involved.
Thanks so much, Nomachot. I have just put tons of resources in the chat box while you were talking through. The first thing I put in was a report of all 21 bills that are currently filed that are moving that would impact the initiative petition process in some way. So you can find out what that looks like in our state right now. I linked in all of the links you talked about, the email your legislator, how to RSVP to the lobby day around this issue, sign up to phone bank, signing the initiative petition protection petition and the organizational sign on. Those things are all in the chat box. And then finally, I stuck in a link to a one-pager on initiative petition reform that kind of just goes over all the things we talked about today. That Amber Foster Hobart, our new communications director, has put together for us. That's a good tool for you to kind of hang on to, and you're welcome to use as you talk with your lawmakers, but also the community members and folks you're connected to that are around you. I think this is one of those issues that might sneak up on folks, right? We kind of assume that this is going to keep being the way that it always has been, and not really understand what those changes mean and how they're going to impact our ability to really weigh in on our state lawmaking process. And it's really important. I think it is an easy thing to kind of get lost in, but it's a really important and significant issue that's happening here that we really need to keep an eye on. Nomachot and I are both very fast speakers, and of course we wrapped up much quicker than we expected to. So we've got so much time for question, and we'd love to interact with you all and answer any questions that you've got. Feel free to come in off of mute and just chat with us, or put something in the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer those. I might have over Red Bulled it, Nomachot. Might have overshot it.
Are initiative petitions always for constitutional amendments?
No. The initiative petition process can be used locally, it can be used at the state level, and they don't have to be a constitutional amendment. Most recently, most of them are, in large part because they can be overturned if they're not a constitutional amendment. And so one example of that, right, is to consider how Kansas City wanted to raise their minimum wage as a city to $15, and the state legislature overturned that. So even the city, said this is what we want to do just in our city, not for the state, and the legislature overturned it. So when the organizers wanted to say, okay, well, let's just make it a statewide increase to the minimum wage, of course, the choice was made to do that as a constitutional amendment because then it can't be overturned by the lawmakers. That's a good question, Linda. Like, they don't have to be constitutional amendments, but they most often are because it's really the only way to tell them they have to do it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at that Google document, and of these, which of the bill numbers do you think have the most legs? Are you seeing? Just so I can watch those.
Yeah, that would be the furthest bill is AGR 79, and that has one of the more extreme thresholds of the 66% for the votes and the signatures. And so that's the one that came through early on and has made it the furthest. So that's more likely the one we've watched, and it passed through the House and was referred to Senate elections, but it hasn't made it past that. And they were on spring break last week too. So, but yeah.
And there are some bills on the Senate side that have moved. And so just because that bill hasn't been heard on that, right, there's 8 more weeks of session left. There's still plenty of time for these bills to move forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right, well, I don't see any reason to hold on to you longer than you need to. Nomachot and I will hang out a little bit and stick around to answer questions that sort of pop up, but I do want to just run through. We have a few Empower Missouri announcements before we let you go. So we'll do that really quickly. The first is we have our week of action coming up April 4th through the 7th. April 5th, we're going to be back in the Capitol in person. I am really looking forward to doing that with you all. Again, we would love to have you join us. Please register there on our website. We will focus on all of our priority issue areas, and April 5th, we'll have people working on this initiative petition issue, interacting with their lawmakers, as well as some of our other anti-poverty priorities here at Empower Missouri. We are also really thrilled to be partnering with the Missouri Community Action Network and inviting their staff and network to join us and helping us weigh in on the bills that we're going to influence and the work we're going to do. So I think it'll be a really great day of anti-poverty advocates around the state. So we hope you join us for sure for that. And then we have just a few announcements from Empower Missouri. I mentioned earlier we have Amber Foster Hobart joining as our new communications director. We also have Amber Smith joining recently as our new affordable housing policy manager. It was very fun that two different teams both hired an Amber in the same like 10-day period for us. And we're looking forward to lots of great work with them both. We do still have 2 openings on our website now. We're hiring another affordable housing policy manager who really needs to be located in a more rural part of town or part of the state, excuse me. Springfield, Joplin area is great. And a criminal justice policy manager. And of course, these forums are monthly, and we'll be back here in April to focus on an important food security issue, to how we can support households in poverty across our state in lowering their food costs. So we thank you so much for joining us. And again, we'll kind of hang out, but that's all I have for you today.